Policy and Outreach Coordinator with YWCA Cambridge. YWCA Cambridge is dedicated to eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. We are the City of Cambridge's largest residential housing provider with 103 single-room occupancy units, as well as emergency shelter for families. We do a lot of awesome stuff, but today I'm not here to talk about me. YWCA Cambridge is partnering with YWCA USA's Stand Against Racism Challenge, which is an entire month of articles, podcasts, videos, activities, etc. to really get the ball rolling, get the thoughts going, and talking about institutional and structural racism and how exactly we break that down and fight for a more just and equitable society. And I'm here today with Maritza Grooms from CCTV, and I will let you introduce yourself.
Yes, I am the Associate Director of Community Relations here at CCTV, and I'm very excited to be doing this with you. Yes. Where should we start? You want to know about me?
Yeah, let's start with you. Let's start with you. I just gave a little bit of a long-winded introduction, so you got to mirror it.
Yeah, so Cambridge Community Television, we're a community media center. We have the 3 channels in Cambridge, channels 8, 9, and 96. We are all about giving people a platform to use their voices, to speak about whatever they care about. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the ideas of what media is and the intersections of racism. Yeah, we do a whole lot here at CCTV, from teaching classes, training, and then other community fun things. And then we get to do stuff like this. So let's get into it.
Yeah, totally. Going to start with asking you what your shirt says, because I feel like it is probably pertinent to the conversation.
Yeah, so this is a Malcolm X quote: "The most disrespected, neglected, and unprotected person in America is the Black woman." Word. We can sit with that.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, that's a fantastic place to start us also, so thank you. I know that you have some background in community organizing as well, so it makes sense that you ended up at CCTV.
Yes.
But also, would you like to speak a little bit more about that, how you kind of came to this work?
Absolutely. So probably my whole life, I've either been with a camera in my hand or in front of a camera making really silly faces. But you know, it's actually kind of funny. My family always talks about how I used to practice in the mirror with my hairbrush, pretending to read the news when I was very little. And I realized that was directly because of representation in media. Mish Michaels, who was a meteorologist who just recently passed away, I learned last month. She was my girl. I wanted to be a meteorologist so bad. I thought she was so cool. And I got to meet her when I was in kindergarten.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I was just like, yeah, this is the news. And that was kind of like, I never ever, like, you could not have told me that I would end up actually doing things like this. So fast forward like 20 something years, 2016 was kind of a crazy year for all of us. True. I won't mention why, but that was a big year for my community organizing. A friend of mine, Masada Jones, had organized a few Black Lives Matter vigils, and she and I had been working together on something called the Violence Prevention Coalition out in Lowell, which was aimed to kind of bring together agencies, a bunch of youth agencies, and really empower the youth of Lowell to take control of their city, you know, in a positive, peaceful way. One of the things that came out of that was we need to be talking about how racism impacts the young people and us in these spaces. And so we tried to do a series called Courageous Conversations. It didn't really take off too well at the time, and so we decided we wanted to do our own thing, and Masada founded the Kindred Project. The Kindred Project aims to unite, uplift, and empower the Black communities of Lowell. And it's really just something that was to create more visibility for the Black community in Lowell. That's where I'm from. I'm from Lowell, Massachusetts. And I grew up in Boston. But at one of those vigils, somebody got me on camera saying some words. Wow. And I don't know what I said, but it moved the executive director of the Lowell Telemedia Center, the community media center out in Lowell. And she invited me and my friend to sit on a panel about policing and Black Lives Matter. And Also on the panel was, I forget one guy, but it was the former chief of police in Lowell, and then the guy who kind of sets up their trainings, of course, to talk about the implicit bias training that the cops have to go through and how cops are also scared and blue lives and
awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that was kind of when I really found my voice. And that is why I love community media. That's why I got into the work. And shortly thereafter, I was invited to do a program with a UMass Lowell professor on Black history in Lowell, because it was a thing that we realized people didn't know about. There are 33 underground railroad stops in Lowell, had no idea. The history just wasn't being taught. And we decided, you know, let's use that platform. And then we did one show, we did another show, and we are still doing that show 5 years later. We also recently did a documentary about abolition and anti-slavery activities happening in Lowell.
Awesome.
So yeah, then I left Lowell and I needed a new job. And I happened to be walking down the street, saw that this place was here and they were hiring. I sent my resume to Susan, who was the executive director at the time. She happened to know Wendy and called her up, the former ED at Lowell Telemedia, and Wendy was like, yes, hire her. That's who you want on your team. And that's how I came to work at CCTV. So
cool.
That's probably the shortest version of that story.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of what I was going to ask you about anyway, just kind of talking about how, you know, what the power of media is in kind of allowing the space for these conversations, as well as like giving people power and voice, etc. It's really, really cool. I love hearing about youth-led movements, especially. We do have a youth leadership program as well, but just I've been involved in a couple of things around Cambridge where it's supposed to be youth-led, and it's just awesome. It's awesome.
Yes.
I love letting
That's
young
my
people
past
lead.
life, youth work.
I love it.
Yeah,
no, it's the core of every good movement, in my opinion.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So kind of want to go back to the beginning of your tale, to your meteorologist story, and kind of talk a little bit about representation in general, and like either things, what are some things that either you have faced or you kind of know about that, you know, creates the entire environment that we make media and film and documentaries, etc. in, and how that's kind of like impacted your work.
Absolutely. So yeah, you know, I feel like I was really lucky being born at the end of the 80s and growing up in the 90s, because that was really kind of when people were seeing diversity was important. But then it was like slowly phased out in this really weird way. You know, we had shows like, I'm rewatching Living Single right now, like it's brand new, like Queen Latifah. Oh my goodness. But you know, you had shows like that. We had UPN, which was like a whole network of just Black television. We had the WB that was putting on all kinds of stuff. And it was important. You know, we had We Are the World. That was like an important thing. And there were some problematic things that at the time were kind of radical. It was, you know, be colorblind and things like that. But it was people of color who were saying it because we just wanted to be seen. And I feel like this is kind of what happens in media anyways. You know, it changes over time. The things that were the most important at a time changes. But yeah, I feel like I was really lucky. And I am a light-skinned Black woman. And so I'm even more privileged to be able to see myself on TV. So I was definitely the archetype that was more acceptable. And there were different tropes for my darker skinned sisters. But then, you know, you wonder like, okay, well, you got some Black representation, but where's everybody else? Like there's a whole other group, there are whole other groups of people constantly, right? But you know, you grow up in these spaces and you don't see yourself, and then you wonder, you know, where am I? Where am I in media? What am I supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to be achieving am I supposed to be going out for the cheerleader role? No, like that's not me. Like, and then here comes Bring It On, right? And I'm a dancer, so I have some feelings about cheerleaders.
Cheerleading is a sport, I will say it.
Oh, they are athletes, for sure. Dancing is not the same. But
fair enough.
yes, no, I respect cheerleaders. when Bring It On came out, that was probably one of the first times that cultural appropriation was really addressed in like my life. And I didn't have the words, I didn't have the language, but I knew when Gabrielle Union and her girls got in those like came to their show, came to their football game, and they were doing their routine, it blew me away. It was something that I was like, there's something to this. Why is this? It's making me feel something, you know? And then there was a time I took a class in sociology. It was the one class in sociology I had ever taken. And we were talking about this exact thing, the representation of BIPOC folks in film and media. And it blew my mind how little I knew about the world, because we watched just a clip of a documentary about folks in Brazil, and I didn't even know that there were darker skinned Brazilians, you know, and then you go and you see all of these different things, and you look at media around the world and you see, why is it that everybody is promoting lightening creams? Why are the lightest skinned people are the only people who are in novellas or on Telemundo? You know, like what's going on? Like so I'm also part Puerto Rican, and on my mom's side of the family, we have literally a whole spectrum of shades of color in my family. And I had never seen darker skinned Latinx people on TV, you know, or even in the books that we consume, media all around, right? You know, and then I think of Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi's The Danger of a Single Story. Have you watched that TED Talk? Highly recommend if anybody hasn't watched it. But that kind of was one of those big turning points in my life. And I realized, something's just not right here. And what are we doing about it? What are we doing to change the way that our stories are being told? One of my favorite quotes, even though I know Hamilton is super problematic, who lives, who dies, who tells our story?
I'm not laughing at the quote. I'm laughing at the,
because it is. We have to say it, you know, it's super problematic. And it was a turning point for us in media, right? So once again, here's BIPOC people doing something that's super huge and impactful for the community. And you're representing like slave owners in this positive light, and like history is just whatever. And it's art, right? But it's important. All of it's important because that opened doors for a lot of people.
Especially for Broadway, honestly. Folks go, oh, you're looking at, you know,
Especially for people on, you know, and there are still so many barriers that people face. And I know this is about racism, but I have to think about it in terms of intersectionality, because
everything is everything.
Exactly. We look at like things like Pose now, right? Why are we just now getting queer representation, queer BIPOC representation in mainstream media? And thank goodness we are finally getting it. You know, like, oh, I can't even talk about that last season because I was sobbing the entire, oh, Billy Porter is always serving. But anyways, so when you grow up not seeing yourself, it makes you want to ask questions. And so for me, I went the path of history. History is my jam, and I really feel like the more that you learn about history, the more that you can contextualize where we are now and make better choices for the future. And so that's how I use my media power, is really like analyzing history and bringing it forth. And we've, on one of my shows, History in Lowell, we do that, but it's by analyzing the different immigrant groups that have come through, the different trials and tribulations that they face, and the way that some of the vestiges of those groups are still represented in the city, in the town. Bringing that forward makes you feel proud of where you are and where you come from, right? So why aren't we doing that more broadly? And then one other thing I'll say about representation, a friend of mine who like blows me away, a bunch of my friends are just like founders of their own organizations, and I just think they're all incredible. But she's a Black woman in Lowell, Krista Brown, and she is an actress. So of course I would have a friend who is an actress because I love media and all forms of it. And she you know, we were living in the Merrimack Valley, and she was coming to Boston for roles because there were just no roles that really represented her. Now, you know, we're talking about the small screen, the big screen, but and the stage, there were just nothing. There was just nothing out there for her. So then she decided to create it, Free Soil Arts Collective, and it's like amplifying the stories of marginalized communities. And she's like I don't even know how many years she's been. I think since 2018. She got a bunch of us. So the first big production that she did was called Hair Tales, Stories of Black Heritage. You can find it on YouTube.
Nice.
It was my first adult stage experience. We did a stage reading, but it was the way she did it. We all would gather in my living room, and she would just pose these questions to us. And one of the questions was like, did you ever see yourself represented? Like your natural hair, like, or even just somebody who talked about hair that was from your community, like, you know, where do you see yourself? And these are the questions that keep coming up in my friend groups, keep coming up in my community. Where do you see yourself represented? And if the stories aren't told by us, will they ever be told?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a very long answer.
No, that was a great, thank you. You touched on so many things. I think the main reaction that I'm having to that is just like, where is the money in the industry, and like why these stories aren't being told is because it's about what's profitable. And I mean, I'm also thinking about, because we started talking about media in the 90s and then going into media now, like now we have 90% of all media controlled by like 5 giant companies. It's really hard to like take any of that apart and say like, okay, what is white supremacy without capitalism? What is the erasure of all these communities like without this profit motive that is driving everything? And so I think it's also really interesting to me, at least, like how media has changed as we've seen those monopolies and as we've seen like all those smaller networks and all of this really awesome community stuff that is happening on the ground floor, like being bought out, being taken over, being, oh, this is not making enough money, and so alas, you have to sell out to, I don't know, Time Warner. I don't know. They're not relevant anymore. I don't know why that's the first thing that popped into my head.
It is relevant. They're all relevant.
Cool. Everyone's, Anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it's huge. It's huge. And you're right. Everything is connected in the way that we tell these stories and who gets to tell them and who gets to play them. And it's like those twin conversations of, if the roles aren't being written for people specifically, like BIPOC folks, how are they entering into these spaces? Are they playing roles that are really just not acknowledging any facet of their experience, that are just like, I don't know, colorblind roles, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Or unfortunately, the other side is like, oh, are we getting, oh, there's a push to hear these stories, let's just cast whoever, and then we get a bunch of like cis actors playing trans people, and just a lot of stuff that is going on that is probably not telling the story in the way that it should be told. And again, I think about that profit motive a lot, and where that,
which is so ridiculous because we keep seeing it time and time again. One of my favorite examples is a recent example is Shang-Chi. They didn't think that was going to make money, and it broke the box office, and it was amazing, and it was impactful, and they had actual Asian characters who were like, imagine you use people from that community to tell that story, even though it's a superhero movie. You know, like the same could be said for Black Panther. Like,
well, that's a really fun example because of what the actual like moral of Black Panther, who is right, who is wrong, goes. But I don't want to delve. I don't want to delve into that one because that is
a whole different,
real fun.
Yes.
But and I think that there's also like, we've seen so many giant blockbuster hits of the last couple of years, not so many, but enough that there really shouldn't still be the stereotype that like movies without a white lead are gonna get all of this box office money. But it's still like, we're these giant companies and people who are paying funders of these films are just really not putting those. I don't know. There's a lot. There's definitely a lot there. I recently saw Turning Red.
I haven't seen it yet. I
can't talk about it, but you need to see Turning Red.
I know.
You need to see Turning Red. I say directly to the camera. It's so good. I think that there's so much room when we let people write about their own experiences, and especially with kids' movies, and like, it's so important, and it's so impactful for people who can see themselves or see their friends or say like, oh, my friend had this thing at lunch the other day and I don't know what it is. Now I saw this movie and this character also has this thing for lunch. That's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, it blows my mind. It's such a no-brainer, and that would increase by $10 billion. I have facts and figures. That's the only fact and figure I have. But $10 billion is the money that they're missing out on by not telling these stories, or by keeping the barriers in place to not tell these stories.
Yeah,
that's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money. Yeah. There's just so much here. I think the next thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, I mean, we're talking about how a lot of the industry is terrible and bad and not reflecting the experiences of real people. People aren't allowed to tell their own stories. What do you think the role of media is in being able to do these things? I know we've kind of touched on that a little bit throughout the vein, connecting all of the things that we've talked about. But like, how do we use media as a tool to kind of fight this oppression, fight controlling images, fight white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes.
And you don't have to have all the answers. I know that's like the largest question ever. Please solve white supremacy right now on camera.
Well, I've got the answer right back now.
Oh, with your $10 billion?
Yeah, my $10 billion. Oh, I wish. That might, but it wouldn't. So this is a thing that I think about regularly, just in my life, right? How do we solve white supremacy? How do we dismantle the oppressive structures that have kept us all and are continuing to keep us all kind of in our boxes, right? Because it doesn't just impact BIPOC people, it impacts all of us. And that's one of the things I think we could use media to do, is to really demonstrate how all of the isms, all of the structural and systemic racism and oppression actually is not just impacting marginalized communities, but it also continues to impact low-income white folks, and how it's created disenfranchisement for those folks. But that's one thing that we could do. I think that people like Ava DuVernay, the documentary 13th, that every single time I watch that, it just guts me. But that's one way we can educate people, right? And I think it's important to just show people being people. Issa Rae.
Yes.
My girl.
Yes.
Because Insecure, woo, it was beautiful, but it gave you so much nuance without being so hand-fisted, right? Because then there are things like Dear White People, which the movie itself I thought was excellent. And then as the series went on, it kind of got...
How many seasons is it?
I don't know.
I only watched the first season.
Yeah,
it was still a little bit. It was a little much still.
It is. And it only kind of gets weirder and worse from there. The last season was like a musical season. I was like, what are y'all doing? Stop it.
They're just experimenting now.
Yeah.
At that point, they're like, we have the money. Let's go. Do whatever
you want. And this is where I think like we have to really think about the limits of what we can do. We can't solve everything, like you said. We can't solve everything overnight. There's not just one quick fix. But it's important to uplift these stories. It's important to create paths for the people behind the scenes, because really these stories aren't going to get told if you don't have the writers, if you don't have the directors, if you don't have the producers, if you don't have, you already mentioned, the investors. Like Selma wouldn't have made it to the box office if it wasn't for Oprah. That really bugs me, because like Oprah is also just a problematic figure, and also another person who has broken so many barriers as a Black woman in media. And having her first, I think it was like the first Black woman to have a syndicated like talk show or something like that.
I think so.
Yeah. So like, but that wasn't really for the community. Like she wasn't really about the community, and she does things for the community here and there. So it's all really complicated and tricky, and I don't think that it's going to get less complicated. I don't think it's going to get less tricky. I think that we have to be very intentional about the things that we do, and the ways that we move forth, and the ways that we go about even addressing the barriers, because some of those things can be addressed in hiring policies. It can be addressed in your personnel policy and the way that you look at, problematic behavior. Or things like the Bechdel test, right? Because now we have that's like, okay, a woman has to be, she has to exist outside of a man. She has to have a conversation with another woman that's not about a man. And I forget what the third part of that test is.
All of that was encapsulated in this too. Because I think it's like a woman speaks, a woman has a conversation with another, like speaks not about a man, has a conversation. Yeah. I really should know this. This is so embarrassing. Alison Bechtel, if you're hearing this, I am so sorry. I think that is a very, very interesting one, because so many movies don't pass the Bechdel test, and that is embarrassing for everyone.
Still to this day.
Yes, so embarrassing.
Yes.
Secondly, though, is that I think that it's not it is so important, and it's a really cool kind of introductory metric, but I think that also there's a tendency, especially for white people, to say, okay, let's make a list of things. We're going to check some boxes, and then we are good to go. We passed the Bechdel test. We have a black woman talking to another black woman. Look at us.
Yeah, she's not the sidekick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about the Bechdel test specifically is that it was not, I don't know if you know the backstory of okay. I didn't want to speak down to you if you already know what I'm talking about.
Tell me.
So
and
Alison
we're educating
Bechtel,
the audience.
So true. Hello audience. Alison Bechtel, so author of Fun Home, author of Dexter Watch Out For, whole bunch of stuff, famous lesbian, really awesome. It was a joke within one of her comic strips that two characters were going to see a movie. She didn't make it as a thing. It was literally just two of her characters that she wrote having this conversation that were saying, was there a woman? Did she talk to another woman about something other than a man? And so the fact that that one moment in this giant comic strip, and I mean, she has so much fantastic work, that's what got turned into this is how we tell if it's feminist.
Wow.
And I do still think it's important, but it's so interesting that it was this part of a larger conversation, and especially one that existed within lesbian communities and within communities of saying we need to see women interacting with each other in any way, in a feminist way, in a lesbian way, etc. Women have to be allowed to be people.
Yeah.
But that was boiled down to here are our three little boxes, and this is what we're going to measure. And now there's a website where you can see what movies pass that. I think it's so interesting, and I don't know if she said made any kind of speech or comment on it, but I think it is really interesting that it got taken out of this much larger, much nuanced conversation and became 1, 2, 3.
And that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly how diversity happens. And I think after 2020, everybody is revisiting their diversity initiatives and their affirmative action policies and things like that, because it became buzzwords again. It became in the mainstream again. But people don't really understand that equity and inclusion aren't just checking boxes. Yeah. And that might be where we have to start in order to get what we want.
Both end.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Because I really admire people even though I do not watch his films, Tyler Perry. Because he created his own thing. I remember being a kid going to see his plays. That tells you a little bit about my family. But I remember going to whatever the theater was in Dorchester, going there and watching this and seeing these people go from this stage, knowing that is where they came from, to now they're in these big movies and people, like I said, it's a little bit not for me, but he's doing it and he's funding his own films. Jordan Peele, another one, they're the exception. They're not the rule though. And that's the problem that we're seeing is there are so many exceptional people being highlighted and uplifted, but what were their paths? Who was there for them? Who said, okay, we'll let you in to this industry? And it's always about how do we get a seat at the table? I'm not really interested in that. I want to know how we can build our own ecosystem outside of the very, very problematic industry that Hollywood and TV and film have become over. It's never been a safe place. We've always known.
I mean, one of the materials for the day that everyone hopefully will be watching this having read is this analysis on the impact of Birth of a Nation. And I mean, if we're talking about the history of racism in film, that is a place to start. So yeah, none of this is new, and I think it's also. It's interesting. I mean, I was not to age myself as a baby, but I was not really watching a ton of media during the 90s as I was a toddler. Wasn't really in there, but I think it's so interesting that there have been waves of oh, now it's important. Now following XYZ event, or I hit my mic, sorry. When Get Out happened, for example, everybody lost it and was Get Out is so good, but then we also had celebrities I don't remember who it was. I think I know which white woman it was, but I don't want to say it in case I'm wrong. But we had very famous privileged white women being like, Get Out was so good, not realizing that like the movie was about them and their community. And so there's this disconnect between like, oh, this is a really awesome film that has nothing to do with my actual life or the way that society is built. How fun and cool. And so I think that also comes up and comes into play when we talk about like all of these genre breakers of recent years.
Yeah, for sure. And then we have to look at, right, because a movie like that, if you get enough movies like that where white folks are not the center of the film and they kind of are the monster without them realizing that they're the monster, then it kind of changes the narrative a little bit. It changes the dialogue, but we need more, right? And then sometimes we need stuff that's not even about that. I think that's also why Black Panther had such the impact that it did, because at the time I feel like there was just slave movie after slave movie coming out. Like,
that was that era,
right? Like, I was like, am I bugging? Like, I do not want to.
We needed a Black superhero action movie to kind of we need all genres to be happening all of the time instead of just
all of those
these
things. Yes, and like, and even things like one of the like most impactful movies that I felt like speaks about the times, is representative, and it's informative. And it will make everybody uncomfortable. Fruitvale Station. Because Ryan Coogler might have done Black Panther, but he also did Fruitvale Station. And Michael B. Jordan, too. I just realized that he was in both of those movies. But
he's everywhere, as he should be.
He really is. But you have such, like, that movie was a horror movie. It was a tragedy. It was based on a true story. And it wasn't just, you know, cell phone video image of what we see, because that's also media. What we see on online, what we see on our social media, that's all media as well. And these things kind of have to be made. They have to be put forward. And it's a little scary for me to say that, because after like years and years, I want to say 10 years now since Trayvon Martin, you know, and then you just keep seeing it again and again and again, captured on film. I remember watching it was Amanda Seales cry as she found out about Ahmaud Arbery in 2020, you know, because she saw the footage. And where's that line? Where's the line of like, this is it's important because it rallied people who probably weren't thinking about this. They probably weren't having these conversations before. We had to be at home, so everybody had to be, you know, consuming some kind of media. Even like, well, I'm trying really hard not to like be disrespectful to any group of people, but there are those people who thought, well, I'm not racist. I don't have too many privileges. And then they saw that and like, oh my gosh, the amount of messages. Oh my God, Maritza, is this what you've been talking about for years?
Stop.
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely have a couple of friends who in the like weeks after each thing would post on their little Instagram stories and be like, hey, if you are white and we are not close, please stop messaging me and asking me how I'm doing. Why are you doing that to me? I don't understand. I mean, like, I do understand, but like, can you stop? And so I think there is this like, for folks who are like, I'm not racist, or I don't, and it's like, oh, immediately, like, I have to do something. I have to check on, like, the nearest person of color, the nearest Black person to me. And it's like, what is that doing? What are you doing? And I think that, I know that came up also. I used to teach health education online for a year in, like, 2021, when a lot of this was happening. And so when we were having these conversations, it's like, how do we, especially with young people, like, taking in all of this incredibly violent media and incredibly, like, viscerally gory, terrible, and like what does that do to a young person to see that? Because but it's also, as you were saying, the power of, you can't ignore something when it's shoved in your face. And so it's, I don't know what like, there is no answer to that. It is always going to be this like push and pull of what is necessary and what is traumatizing, and like but then also all of the folks who do not have a chance to opt out of that trauma. Like, how do we have these conversations? And again, like, I don't think there is a way to immediately solve any of that, but it's at least good, in my opinion, that the conversations have been happening more and that people are more ready to talk.
Definitely.
and ready to do this. So
absolutely. I mean, find the people that are going to want to have these conversations,
Yeah.
because there are definitely people who don't.
Oh yeah.
And then there are some people who maybe some days they want to, and so there are some days that nope, I'm not the one. And I'm one of those people that I'll flip flop and I'll be like, yes, let me educate all of you, because if I don't do it, then who? You know what I mean?
But it's so exhausting. It's
Yes.
so.
And that's when I flip flop.
Yeah.
And I'm
No,
like,
and
everybody leave me alone.
Yeah, no, incredibly fair.
Yeah.
I have, as a really white passing person, and like I'm South Asian, so it's not, a lot of the things that happen are not directly directed at people from my community, and so it's not, I'm not the one called on, but as a trans person, and often the only trans person in some spaces, you know, it's the weird balance of like, well, I have to say some things. If I don't, like, these conversations aren't gonna happen, and then I'm gonna have to sit here and twiddle my thumbs forever. But also, like, it is so emotionally taxing to have to do that and have to educate people and be like, okay, well, I'm not being paid for this. This is my unpaid labor, but all right, here we go.
I put up my Cash App for a while.
yeah. I mean,
and then I stopped because I was like, I don't want to capitalize on a movement. Like,
and then there's that line,
right?
Yeah,
it was a lot. It's a lot of tricky moving parts. We are not, you know, the representatives for our groups, our identity groups, and where is that responsibility too, you know? And it's almost kind of the same with media. There are people who just want to make media just to make it because it's fun and because it's something that's like, I like, they want to be able to separate their identities from it, but you can't. Yeah. You can't. Like, we live in no matter what, we do live in this very white, very cis, very hetero, capitalist patriarchy. Yes. And so it is, no matter what, you are going to be a representative. You are going to be seen as a representative of your group. And that's also kind of frustrating. But you should just make stuff. You should make media. You should learn about media. You should do as much as you can. I remember watching Breakfast at Tiffany's when I was younger. Yeah. And I can't remember, Mickey Rooney playing in Yellowface.
Yes, okay.
And I didn't know it was Mickey Rooney when I watched it because I was really young. Right. And I just romanticized what's-her-face, Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very romanticized movie. Like, the whole movie is kind of shot. Yeah. No,
yeah, exactly. And I was just like, oh my goodness. And you just kind of like laugh off or just ignore Mickey Rooney. And then when you get a little bit older, and you're like, what? Why would they think that's okay?
Why would they let him do that?
Who lets this happen? And you're like even the cartoons of the time, like, oh my goodness, there's so many issues here, and there are still things that are happening. But I feel like a piece of media that does a really great job of tackling all of these issues and tackling the issues of the day, Atlanta. Donald Glover, at least in this this most recent season that has just been released. It's one of those like subversive things, but it's in your face and it makes you think. It makes you think very deeply about a whole lot of things like, ooh, I laughed at that. I don't know if I'm supposed to laugh at that. And now I don't know if that was for me. The reason, and we won't talk about Dave Chappelle in the present, we'll talk about Dave Chappelle in the before times when he was doing Chappelle's show and why he stopped doing it. Because he felt like white people were laughing just a little too hard at these jokes that were poking fun at black folks, you know? And so it's like, even when you are the person telling your own story, who's consuming your what you're putting out? Like,
I think that's why networks and groups and community, like those things are so important. I'm thinking about like BET, like why these by community for community are so important. But I think now, like with everything kind of in this one global sphere, it's really hard to make media and be like, well, this isn't for you, but I can't stop you from watching it and consuming it. And so I guess it's more about like fostering that critical thought. So again, as you were saying, like, oh, I laughed at that. Oh, maybe I should not like that. Let me take a second. Why did I laugh at that? Like, what is going on? And it's just really how I think it comes down to like, how do we foster those conversations without just giving people like little sound bites.
That's the problem too.
Yeah.
Especially in this day and age.
I was going to say, sound bites are, I forget who, I saw this thing that was kind of talking about movies now and saying how everybody is just making movies to be screen capped, making movies to be memed, making movies to be gift, and like this idea of this really like edible soundbite is that's what the movie is. And like the trailer doesn't predict anything anymore because the movie is just the trailer. It's just gonna be like bam, 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 bam. Here are all these little things, and I think we're in a really weird age of movies, of TV, of everything.
Yeah, and it's not going away.
No. So I guess it's now like, what do we do with the culture? Like, how do we, use things that are happening as a tool for racial justice, as we see, like, a bunch of nonprofits hopping on TikTok. Like, there are ways that people are using what is occurring naturally to kind of their own ends. And I mean, I think that is it's what we can do in the
It's kind of just, I always like. I get really frustrated when people are like, oh, you have to focus on the individual because it's a system, right? And you do have to focus on the individual as you, not another person. You have to think about who you are, who do you want to be, what kind of values do you want to uphold and live by? And so that's, what do you want to consume? What kind of content do you want to create? And what kind of world do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a world where you feel safe and other people feel safe to express themselves and be themselves? And how do we do that authentically and with intention? There's no easy answer to any of this.
I like that we're ending exactly where we started, which was everything is complicated and everything's everything. Sorry.
Good luck.
No, but I mean, So I guess the last thing that I really wanted to ask you is following off of this, like, how do we use media as a tool for racial justice, as a tool for fighting oppression in whatever forms, whether that be like the actual controlling images, maybe stopping blackface and yellowface. That was a moment. Casting more people, having more people behind the scenes. I don't know if you've seen Our Flag Means Death yet. I am using this as a plug. It's a gay pirate show. Taika Waititi. It's fantastic. There's a non-binary character, and there are 3 non-binary writers in the writers' room, and that fact was amazing.
Yes.
To me. Chills. It's the reflection, and so I think that is also something. And thank you for bringing that up. Also, I feel like we don't really talk about that. It's more about like the writers or who is. But it's like who is in the room, who is making this, who is putting their creative energy into this, in whatever regard. But anyway, last thing I want to say, and is there anything else you would like folks to walk away from this conversation besides everything is complicated and also kind of bad, but also good?
Well, as much as the whole system is controlled by power dynamics, we also have personal power, and we can utilize that personal power by visiting your local community media center and learning how to use cameras, how to edit, how to have your own show. You could have a live show. You could do a studio show at a place like CCTV. That was like a very shameless plug.
I love it.
But it's so true.
It's important. I mean, it's important that people feel like they do have the platform in which to say, oh, maybe someone's watching this who's saying, oh, I've actually always wanted to do that, but like, where do I start? Where do we have these conversations? So
and this is a conversation that people can build on and use, right? You know? So thank you and the YWCA too for all of the incredible work that you do here in Cambridge, and of course the big broad YWCA.
YWCA USA, if you're watching this.
Yes. But I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I would say is like, use your own personal power to make change, and that's with anything, and that's wherever you are. Don't be afraid to speak up, and don't be afraid to learn something new, and also watch documentaries because they give you a lot of information. One last thing I will say, misrepresentation is really good, but there are a series of it's like a docuseries of the decades, and each one of those, I think it's on HBO. I know I watch it on Netflix, but I think they also have it on HBO.
Cool.
Every first episode starts with media and media of that time and what it talks about.
Interesting. I'm going to check that out.
It's so fascinating. Cool. It's so good, and how it's evolved over time. It is mind-blowing, and that's also kind of why it's like, it's complicated and scary, and we have so much personal power. And collaborations like this, it's going to be what makes the dialogue continue and what makes us shift and shape culture as we move forward into the future.
I have no idea how you turned that into that optimistic of an ending. Thank you so much for your time and for talking with me and for all of this amazing wisdom. And I'm going to get the name of that show because I'm going to watch all of the episodes about media.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, I don't really have an outro, but it was nice. It was so nice speaking with you. It was so nice speaking with everybody. Please check out the rest of the Stand Against Racism Challenge. There are little tidbits every day. You can pick and choose what to listen to and watch, and just get the gears going in your brain, because that is, again, the first step to having any of these conversations is really breaking down what we know, what we think we know, and going from there.
Boom.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yay. And that's a wrap.